So hello and welcome to another episode of Geographics. I'm your interim host, Carl Smallwood. Yes, that's my real name. Let me know how funny you think it is in the comments below. And today we're talking about the Bhola Cyclone, the deadliest storm in history that almost sparked a nuclear war. And this video is based on an original article provided to us by Arnoldo Teodrani. If they provide the social links for us, you can find those below alongside my own. But let's get to it. In a matter of minutes, the raging waves had engulfed much of the island. Hai was only 18, but with his father away from home, he was responsible for the lives of 20 of his extended family members, huddled on the first floor of their small brick house. The water had already flooded the ground floor and was quickly rising. Braving the impetuous winds and downpour of rain, he climbed onto the tin roof, but he realised it was too flimsy to withstand his own weight, let alone the weight of his entire family. Desperate for a solution, his mind turned to a nearby, quite sturdy palm tree, which he knew for a fact had weathered several storms in the past. If he and his family could find refuge on the tree, they could resist for a few more hours until the cyclone died down. Guessing at the position of the tree, Hai leapt into the darkness. Incredibly, he made it. Clinging to the trunk, he turned back to the house and called futilely for his family, screaming, "I made it, I made it." He yelled once, he yelled twice, and then a third time, but his voice was answered only by the sound of the waves thrashing against what remained of his house. Hai, a young fisherman, was one of the brave and lucky survivors of the Great Bhola Cyclone, which hit eastern Pakistan, modern-day Bangladesh, on the night of November 12th, 1970. This was the deadliest storm in history, a natural disaster whose consequence sparked the birth of an entire nation and brought the very world to the brink of nuclear war. So let's start with some context here, shall we? Following the partition of British India in 1947, the majority Muslim state of Pakistan was divided into two territories, aptly named West and East Pakistan on the west and east. And that is right, yeah, so never eat shredded wheat. That's how I remember it. East Pakistan was politically and ethnically divided from the rest of the country, which led to put it diplomatically, rising tensions between the two. This region has a 575-kilometre long coastline facing the Bay of Bengal and is very densely populated, with a third of its territory being less than 6 metres above sea level. Because of these factors, East Pakistan and modern-day Bangladesh are particularly prone to suffering from the effects of tropical cyclones. About 5 of these storms hit the Bengal coastline every single year. On November 8, 1970, the tropical storm Nora entered the Bay of Bengal after travelling over Malaysia from the Western Pacific Ocean. Nora's remnants caused the development of a large area of low atmospheric pressure. This grew into another storm, which intensified rapidly. By November 11th, it became a cyclone, with winds raging at speeds of up to 145 kilometres per hour. For clarity, a cyclone is defined as a system of winds rotating around an area of low pressure. And for anyone curious about the difference between a cyclone, a typhoon, and a hurricane, they're all fundamentally the same thing. It's just they're called different things around the world. And we don't get them over here in the UK. We get gales, which is just strong wind which sometimes knocks your bin over. Getting back to the Bhola Cyclone, this specific system travelled north towards the coast, growing in intensity. On the evening of November 12th, the cyclone hit the numerous flat islands off the coast of East Pakistan, of which Bhola was the largest. At this time, the Bhola Cyclone raged with winds of up to 225 kilometres per hour. Moreover, the gales and pouring rains caused a devastating storm surge. Now, storm surge is an abnormal rise in sea level caused by an intense storm, hence the name. In this case, the surge was compounded by an abnormally high lunar tide. As a result, waters rose by more than 10 metres, sweeping inland as an unstoppable force. And this is like one of those things that you learn as you get older. Like, pop culture lied to you about the danger of like cyclones, hurricanes, like tidal waves. It's not like, a 50-foot high wall of water, just knocking skyscrapers over. It's just a tide which rises and then doesn't stop, which is far less cinematic, admittedly, but equally as terrifying and can potentially lethal. Residents on the island and the coast were notified of the incoming cyclone by public radio shortly before 10 p.m. The alert was issued too late and the wording was confusing. So let's deconstruct this point because it's very important to what happened that day. The growing cyclone had been spotted via satellite by the IMD, or Indian Meteorological Department, on November 9th. However, India and Pakistan shared a tense, if not outwardly hostile relationship at the time, which may have affected timely communication of weather data. Regardless, East Pakistani authorities became aware of the incoming cyclone by November 10th. They then activated the warning system designed by one Gordon E. Dunn, a former director of the US National Hurricane Center. Now, according to the authors Scott Carney and Jason McLean in their book The Vortex, this system had two quite literally fatal flaws. First, it required East Pakistani officials to receive authorization from Islamabad in West Pakistan before they could issue a general warning to the general population. A needless level of obfuscation that prevented timely communication with the public. Second, it used a system that rated storms on a scale of 1 to 4. That's 3. Let me try that again. This system rated storms on a scale of 1 to 4, with 4 being the most dangerous. This rating had replaced a previous system which used a 1 to 10 scale, but this had not been widely communicated to the residents of Bengal. So in the case of the Bhola Cyclone, West Pakistani officials not only delayed their response due to administrative and bureaucratic delays, when they did issue an alert, most locals consider the storm to be a minor danger. After all, it's only rated 4 out of 10. That's not that bad. As a result, most were slow to react and did not seek immediate refuge upon higher ground. It was a quite literal perfect storm of incompetence, which would inevitably lead to catastrophe. On the evening of the 12th high, the aforementioned young fisherman and his family were listening to the radio whilst having dinner at home on the island of Manpura. The speaker issued a red 4 alert, which indicated the highest level of danger, but High's family ignored the warning due to their incorrect belief that their humble brick home had survived a much stronger storm in the past. After all, it's only a 4 out of 10. It wasn't, it was the big 4. Later in the evening then, it came as a total shock when waves first slapped against the side of their house. They lived over a kilometre away from the shore. How could the sea have moved inland so quickly? Soon the waves invaded their home and the extended family rushed upstairs. They all listened in despair to the sinister thuds of their farm animals as the waves and winds slammed against the wall of their house. I imagine just like your wall being hit by a cow. So as the water level rose inside the house, High's only way to save his family was to seek refuge on a nearby palm tree. By the time he had clung safely to its trunk, however, it was too late for the rest of his family. High, as well as other residents of Manpura, Bhola and the Bengal coast, survived the night clinging for hours to trees or roofs, battered by the incessant winds, rains and flying debris. During a brief moment of respite as the eye of the cyclone travelled over Manpura, High managed to extract 2 relatives from a nearby house. When the storm started again, the 3 quickly climbed the same palm tree, a decision which saved all of their lives. The Bhola Cyclone finally left Manpura at 4 a.m. on November 13th. As it moved inland, it slowly dissipated, but left behind a trail of unprecedented destruction, mostly caused by storm surges. It wiped out entire villages, and the most affected area, Tazamuddin in the Thena district, lost over 45% of its population. The economy of entire coastal regions, mostly dependent on fishing, was annihilated, with some 77,000 fishermen being killed or severely injured. Approximately 65% of their boats were destroyed. According to World Bank estimates, some 2 million acres of crops were destroyed or left wholly unusable. 280,000 cattle and 500,000 poultry were similarly lost to surging waters. 400,000 houses and 3,500 schools were also completely devastated by the elements. All in all, the local economy had endured almost $700 million of damage in today's value. But it's the death toll of the Bhola Cyclone that makes it especially chilling. According to the World Meteorological Organization, 300,000 people had lost their lives. The figure may have been as high as 500,000 or even 1 million according to more recent estimates by the Bangladeshi government. It's really impossible to establish a definitive number due to the loss of records due to the storm. But even at the low end of the estimate, the Bhola Cyclone is the deadliest tropical storm of all time. As so often happens with natural disasters, the most vulnerable were the ones to suffer the most. According to a study by the CDC, the worst hit demographics were children aged 0 to 4 and the elderly aged 70 and above. Mortality rates in these groups numbered 29% and 20% respectively. Most simply drowned in their sleep. The Bhola Cyclone was the deadliest storm ever recorded, that much is clear. But in terms of sheer size and power, it wasn't even the largest to hit East Pakistan. So what had caused such a high mortality rate then you ask yourselves? Well, as mentioned earlier, it was a combination of several factors. The storm had coincided with an unusually high tide, which increased the size of the resulting surge. Then you have the chilly relationship between India and Pakistan, which may have caused delays in relaying an advance warning. Then there's the fact that the people of the Bengali coast were not yet acquainted with the new rating system. The radio alert was broadcast mere hours before the cyclone made landfall. About this last occurrence, it may have been caused by bureaucratic complications as well, caused by the system devised by Gordon Dunn, but there may be a more sinister explanation. So in the already quoted book The Vortex, authors Carney and McLean relate the story of meteorologist Neil Frank from Miami's National Hurricane Center. After the disaster, the World Bank dispatched Frank to Dhaka, East Pakistan's capital, to investigate why exactly the warning system had failed the way it did. The official in charge of East Pakistan's meteorology department told Frank that he had acted according to the system devised by Dunn. As soon as he had heard about the incoming storm, he had notified his counterparts in Islamabad, but they had issued the green light to warn the population only at a much later stage. Frank also met with a Pakistani general. The officer asked for help from the World Bank for the donation of a C-130 military transport plane, which could be used to patrol the Bay of Bengal and spot incoming cyclones in advance. Frank was left with a lingering impression. The government in Islamabad may have delayed warnings on purpose, a calculated act to suppress the hundreds of thousands of East Pakistani voters before the general elections to be held that December. Moreover, the military may have intended to use this C-130 plane to transport troops from west into East Pakistan in a preemptive plan to suppress any expected unrest. This chain of events may not have been part of a complex conspiracy. However, tensions had been rising between West and East Pakistan, and there was little love between Islamabad and Dhaka. United by religion, the two parts of the country were ethnically and politically divided, with the military government of President Yahya devoted most of its resources to Western territory. After years of military rule, Yahya had allowed for a general election to be held on December 7th. The outgoing president had supported a candidate for the head of the Pakistani People Party, or PPP, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Bhutto's main rival was the East Pakistani leader of the Awami League, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, known as Mujib. His party's policies strongly advocated for autonomy, or even independence, of East Pakistan. If Yahya had plotted to weaponize the cyclone to secure a win for his friend Bhutto, well, the plan backfired, to put it simply, spectacularly. In the aftermath of the catastrophe, Yahya's response was slow, and some would say callous. His government declared a state of natural disaster only a week after the event, and only after significant international pressure. The president himself showed up to survey the damage only in December of that year, following an official visit to China, which he had refused to cut short. In terms of providing tangible relief, the government almost completely ignored the survivors, providing too little aid, too late. Alfred High personally led the first relief efforts in Manipura with the help of a civilian-run organisation and a lot of foreign support. Most of the logistical burden to provide food and indeed medicine to survivors was shouldered by foreign governments, NGOs and just plain old volunteers. As an aside, groups of volunteering doctors who arrived in Bengal later founded Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders. More than 200 relief planes landed in Dhaka in the weeks after the cyclone had landed, but only one came from Islamabad. Indira Gandhi's government in India even offered to help Pakistan by lending transport planes, but Yahya refused. The institutional void left by the government was quickly filled by presidential candidate Mujib. The leader of the Awami League toured Manipura and other stricken islands, offering moral and material support. Millions of East Pakistanis, thus far undecided on the vote, pledged their allegiance to Mujib. When the elections arrived, Bhutto and the PPP won about 80 seats in West Pakistan, as to be expected. But Mujib and his Awami League scooped up 151 out of 153 seats in East Pakistan. All in all, this would have ensured Mujib's victory as Pakistan's first democratically elected Prime Minister in years. Yahya's incompetent approach to disaster relief and Mujib's own efforts to support the Bengali population had eventually brought about this momentous landslide victory. But the transition of power would not be so smooth. President Yahya refused to accept the victory of the Awami League, which prompted widespread unrest in East Pakistan. Mujib loyalists launched demonstrations against Islamabad's government, attacking supporters of the PPP and even non-Bengalis in general. Islamabad responded with a show of force, flying in thousands of soldiers from West Pakistan in March 1971. Governmental forces began concerted attacks against Awami League supporters and other perceived threats, mostly civilians such as local elites, professors and university students. Finally, the Pakistani military also attacked the Hindu minority, which accounted for about 20% of the population. Soon, Awami League supporters organised themselves to fight back, creating the Mukta Bahani, a liberation army waging guerrilla warfare against the regular armed forces in the region. Their goal now was to obtain total independence from West Pakistan and found a new country. And now, so they're all on the same page, a massive unprecedented natural disaster had led to a landmark electoral victory, which in turn has sparked a separatist conflict. But the storm had still to pick up full momentum, and the winds of change would soon envelop other actors into the vortex. Hardship and violence brought on by the conflict led millions of Bengalis to just up and leave East Pakistan, seeking refuge in the Indian state of West Bengal. Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her government estimated that their economy could not withstand the sudden refugee crisis. It would have been more strategically advantageous to engage their longtime rivals in Islamabad with a proxy war. By supporting the separatist Mukti Bahani, Gandhi hoped for a quick resolution to the conflict and the refugee crisis as a whole. Islamabad reacted once again with an airborne show of force. On December 3rd, 1971, the Pakistani Air Force launched a preemptive strike against Indian Air Force bases, officially sparking the Indo-Pakistani War. The Indian Army then invaded East Pakistan with 3 corps, which joined with the now 3 brigades of Mukta Bahani to engage the Pakistani regular forces. In eastern Pakistan, the army had deployed only 3 divisions, which could not oppose India's quick advance. At this stage, the initial storm became a hurricane on a literal global scale. Following border conflicts with Pakistan in 1947 and later 1965, and with China in 1962, India had sought an alliance with the Soviet Union. Moscow and Beijing themselves had also butted head due to ideological reasons first, and then later in 1969, a border conflict, leading to the so-called Sino-Soviet split. India and the Soviet Union had formalised their friendly relationships in the August 1971 Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation. Well, at least it was aptly named. So to recap the situation, Islamabad's government was aligned to China and India was aligned with the Soviet Union. Enter another major force in this system, the United States of America. Washington had been traditionally an ally of Pakistan, and in the early 1970s, President Nixon had been seeking rapprochement with China. Nixon and his national security advisor, huge piece of Henry Kissinger, feared that an Indian invasion of West Pakistan would have facilitated Soviet expansion into South Asia, as well as China's loss of influence over the region. Therefore, Nixon authorized the shipment of military supplies to Pakistan's regular forces, encouraging Chairman Mao to do the same. When India's December offensive brought Pakistan to the verge of defeat, Nixon dispatched to the Bay of Bengal Naval Task Force 74, led by the aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise. India perceived this as a nuclear threat and called on for Soviet help. On December 6th and 13th, the Soviet Navy responded by sending a fleet of ships and submarines, also armed with nuclear missiles. The chain of consequences unlocked by the cyclone had led to a tense confrontation between the 2 most powerful nations in the world, both armed with nuclear weapons and both ready to use them. A confrontation which may result in a much, much higher death toll. Luckily, cooler heads prevailed in the waters of the bay. The standoff dragged on for a few days until news reached Washington and Moscow that the war was over. On December 16th, the Pakistani armed forces officially surrendered in Dhaka. Mujib and the Awami League had achieved their goal. With the help of India, East Pakistan became an independent country, with a new name of Bangladesh. The country held its first parliamentary elections in 1973, resulting in a predictable victory for the Awami League. Unfortunately, the government was later overthrown by a military coup in 1975, during which Mujib and his family were killed. Well, that's another story for another day. So let's take a step back to 1972 and shift our focus from geopolitics to meteorology. Upon assuming power, one of the first actions of Mujib's government was to approve the creation of the National Cyclone Preparedness Programme, or CCP. The CCP coordinated the activities of state agencies, private donors, and local communities to improve alert systems, which were very obviously lacking as the Bhola Cyclone was only too happy to show. So they also improved infrastructural development and other activities to mitigate the effect of cyclones. As of today, the CPP can count on over 200 employees and some 76,000 volunteers who ensure the rapid communication of cyclone warnings issued by the Bangladesh Meteorological Department. The CCP also takes care of rescuing, sheltering, and offering medical treatment to survivors. Bangladesh would still be stricken by frequent deadly storms. An example of this came in 2007 with Cyclone Sadia, which was as severe in magnitude as the Bhola storm, but its death toll was estimated at approximately 3,400 people. Still quite a high figure, but nowhere near as high as 500,000 or even 1 million. Moving on, in May 2009, Cyclone Isla caused the evacuation of about 500,000 people, and fatalities numbered the comparatively lower 339. Of course, that's 339 too many in our opinion, but it's a far cry from the hundreds of thousands of victims lost to previous cyclones. We can only hope that the CPP continues to perform a great job in saving and safeguarding innocent lives from future disasters. If there are two things we've learned from this story, it's that the worst outcomes of meteorological disasters can be prevented with the appropriate advanced warning systems, and that natural events can indirectly lead to momentous geopolitical change, up to and including nuclear confrontation. If you want to learn more about the political implications of the Bhola Cyclone, we highly recommend you read The Vortex by the aforementioned Scott Carney and Jason McLean, or if you can access the sources we've used in the description that you can find linked below this very video. So thank you for tuning into this episode of Geographics. As mentioned at the start of the video, I've been your interim host, Carl Smallwood. Yes, that's my real name. You can go look it up on social media. Also, as mentioned, this video is based on an original article provided to us by Arnoldo Teodrani. If they've got any links they've provided, they're also below alongside my own. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you've got something to say about it, including my pronunciation of certain words and my presenting style, I am trying to strike the balance between the previous host, the much more aerodynamic Simon Whistler's, admittedly far more professional approach, and my own casual, less professional one, which I describe as professionally unprofessional over on my own channel, Fact Fiend with Carl Smallwood, which you can also find linked below. But yeah, any feedback is appreciated, and I'll continue to try and improve my setup and my presenting style. Hence why we've got this new mic, and I have a fancy ass Sennheiser, is that how you pronounce it? Sennheiser shotgun mic, which apparently is the best one you can get. That's not like $2,000. So hopefully the sound quality when we get this set up will be much higher as well. Thank you to everyone for watching the video. If you want to see more like this, subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, have the day you all deserve. Cheers.